We are back for another episode of the Hearse Chaser podcast show. I'm glad you're here. Today we're talking about how to choose the right executor, trustee, or power of attorney. The biggest, toughest, probably most important decision is who do you trust to carry out your wishes. We're going to talk about tips. We're going to talk about stories where it didn't go well and right, and give you some great advice, things that I would look for when clients ask me, who should I pick? That's what we're going to talk about. Thanks for choosing us today on the Hearse Chaser podcast show.
You're listening to the Hearse Chaser podcast show. Here's your host, Stephen McClellan.
Okay, so before we dive in and talk about how to choose a person, let me tell you what these terms mean so we get them clear. Clients get these confused all the time. Most of the time in a client meeting, I have learned this. I have learned to just subtly say the right term and not correct them, okay? Because sometimes if you correct a client in a meeting, it just confuses them and they forget what they're trying to say. So I don't really care what words you use generally in a meeting because I want to understand what are you talking about? What are you talking about this person doing or not doing? So, but I do, in this case, let me just give you the names. So first, there's an executor or executrix, okay? That is the person nominated in a will, okay? Wills have executors. If you have a trust, you have a trustee. Revocable trust, irrevocable trust, you have a trustee. And then there's a power of attorney. Power of attorney works during your lifetime. So when you die, you have no more powers of attorney. You have either a trustee or an executor. Now, there's another term. Let's say you die without a will. You don't have an executor. Your assets, if they go to probate, the court will appoint an administrator. Okay, that's not your choice. That's who the court finds to administer your estate. And generally speaking, the administrator or administratrix is the fastest one to the courthouse. Okay, that's generally how that works. Okay? So first, rule number one, most important rule is to choose someone you trust. Okay? And there's a joke. This is an original joke. This is the only original joke that I have ever come up with. And I've spoken at a college a few times for a graduate school for health professionals, and I tell this joke, and so here's my original joke. That's the setup for it. So a lot of times when I sit across clients and we talk about who do you want as your trusted power of attorney executor, and they have multiple children, all right, I can tell you with 100% certainty in my line of work that clients never hesitate on who they want as power of attorney. All right? So parents may say, oh, we trust all of our kids equally. We love them all. But when it comes to my meetings, they know exactly who it is. That's kind of the joke. It's not always that way, right? But I will say 90% of the time, they know exactly who they trust. And a lot of times they're choosing from their kids. And I'll talk about when you don't have kids or you have kids you don't trust, but most mom and dads, they have seen these kids from the very beginning of their life, and some of the qualities and the proclivities that they have transitioned even into their adulthood. And they're not surprised by how their kids have turned out, kind of because how they've seen them. But a lot of times that can change, though. I will say, there's a caveat here that people can change. Biggest change is spouses. Spouses change relationships dramatically. Generally speaking, I have found that when my clients are talking about their kids, they will talk about how the wife changed the son more than the husband changing the daughter. So let me say that again. It's the daughter-in-laws changing their sons more. That's generally what I see, and I think that goes to the dynamic that sons generally kind of leave their parents and cleave to their wife's family. That's what I typically see. Okay, it's not always true, but part of these podcasts, you're just trying to take the pros and cons and the golden nuggets. So it's just something I see. So your kid can be fine, but if they get married or if they get a divorce, that can change things dramatically. This is why I'm telling you, whatever you choose, you update, right, as things change. But generally, people know who they want to choose. And this person's got to be trustworthy, and they have to know how to handle your affairs. Somebody came in last week and they said, well, that doesn't make any sense. I was just told the oldest one gets to choose under the law. And I'm like, that's not how it works. It doesn't say the oldest gets to choose. Generally, the law says it's a majority of the kids, if anything. But age here isn't the choice. It's going to be over to somebody who is trustworthy. And so some of the dynamics that you'll consider is how that person's role is going to affect the other children. All right? So I will often ask, do your kids get along or not? If they say, yes, they all get along, I'm like, whew, this is going to be really fast. But then we start diving into things, and they say, well, my oldest and the second child don't get along very well. They're very close in age. They fought a lot. My oldest and youngest get along really well, and the second and the youngest get along. So it's really that first and oldest have some conflict. So, well, maybe we name the youngest, the one everyone gets along with, to handle those skills. So sometimes it's just personality, but I really, what I'm looking at is when I'm looking at the kids, I will always ask, what do the kids do for a job? Because their job often tells me who has, like if somebody's gone through college, if they've gotten a job, if they've been at a job for 5 or 10 years, I'm thinking, okay, there's a lot of stability there. If they've hopped jobs every other year, they have been out of work for a period of time. I'm kind of seeing a picture here of who I would choose and not choose, right? How long have they been married? If the kids have been married for 25 years and they have 3 kids, that's a lot of hard work, right? Most of my clients who are 65 know, yeah, it's a lot of work to have kids and all that. So if their kids are doing it, then that's probably a good choice. You don't need to have a son or a daughter that is a lawyer or a CPA to be a trusted individual. You principally want that child or power of attorney trusted person to be able to handle a checkbook, to pay bills, and to be responsible. So if someone says to me that they've loaned money to a kid, it's kind of a red flag. Okay, if that child hasn't been able to work for the things that they need and get their own loans, it's kind of a red flag. Not always. Again, in these podcasts, I just kind of say some general rules, not always true. But sometimes if someone has come to mom or dad and asked for money, it kind of tells me maybe something is not right here. Okay? I will say one of the things to think about is, well, first, know that we do a financial and healthcare power of attorney. Okay, we divide them for 2 reasons. One, doctors do not care about your finances. Your financial folks don't care about healthcare. So we divide them for that reason. But also, you may have the daughter that's a nurse and son that's a CPA. So dividing that task makes a whole lot of sense, right? So that's important, too, to think about their role. I will say proximity matters a ton here, okay? If you've got a son who is the rock star son who lives in New York and he's extremely busy, and you have a daughter who is a stay-at-home mom and lives close by, well, proximity is going to matter a lot here. And you could take the philosophy that busy kids are always busy and they're just going to find a way to get things done. Or you could take the position that too busy, there's no way they could handle things. Hard to say, but you have to think about that. I will say when it comes to medical, generally the one who has medical knowledge, that's who I'd prefer. But sometimes it's the one who is there who can be in the hospital room that's irreplaceable. They can read a room. They can talk to doctors. They're taking them to and from the places. So sometimes I would say proximity matters a lot. Now, just because you name a child doesn't mean they can't consult with the other kids, but you want to think in terms of the doctor. So if you have 3 kids, if my power of attorney said, for example, assuming my wife predeceased me, it's my oldest, my middle, and my youngest. All of them have to make decisions together. People say that. I just want them all to work together. Well, you put the doctor in a position where he's looking at this and he's saying, I got to talk to all 3 of these people to make a decision. That's rough, right? The doctor would prefer the word or. So it could be the oldest or middle or youngest. So only one of them has to make a decision. If you travel, I feel like in Arkansas, a lot of people live in my state. Like their families live here. There's a lot of folks that they retire here. They live, their kids are here, and they're coming here to be grandparents. I totally understand that. But I think maybe in other cities, people are spread out. So if you're watching this in another area, you may travel. You may travel to different states. You may even spend maybe like the summers in Michigan and the winters in Texas or something. I don't know. If you travel, you might want to consider that when it comes to the healthcare powers of attorney. You may say, oh, my Michigan son, yeah, it makes sense when I'm up there. When I'm in Texas, I want my Texas daughter, right? So, or makes sense if you travel. Some people don't think about that, but if you travel from state to state, you want to make sure that the one that you're with has those right powers of attorney, and I wouldn't advise just changing them back and forth. They say 2 heads are better than 1. That creates checks and balances. I don't know. A lot of times when I press and I say, okay, what if they disagreed? What do you think then? Well, this one I think would be more level-headed. That's the term I hear. Well, in that context, maybe it makes sense that that's the one who should be first just to break all ties. Okay? You got to think in terms of, if they can't agree. Also, too many cooks in a kitchen. You've heard that phrase. That can also be a concern.
Thank you for tuning in to the Hearse Chaser podcast show. Our mission is to be your first choice for last wishes. Want to dive deeper? Join us over at the Hearse Chaser Academy, where we've created 8 on-demand courses for each stage of life. From young adulthood to retirement, navigating separation or blended families, and everything in between, we help you plan for the future, no matter where you're at. Now stay with us as the ride continues on the Hearse Chaser podcast show.
Now, let me say something that if you're watching this and you're 70, there's something I tell 70-year-olds that I don't tell 60-year-olds, okay? It's this realization. The older you get, especially 70s, you see the writing on the wall and you say, yeah, I could get sick at the same time my wife does. And so in that context, it's not great if your spouse is first and then your kids are the backup. Really, if mom and dad are both sick, that kid who's number 1 ought to be on the first line. So one of the recommendations I give for people who are in their 70s, I say, I know it made sense. Yes, in your 60s, it made sense, spouse first, then kid. But now I think maybe we move that kid up. When I suggest that, nearly every client says, yeah, that makes 100% sense. That's a really great idea. And I say, thank you. I've just seen that leapfrogging problem. Like, how do you get the other spouse off? Maybe you have to declare them incapacitated, all kinds of things. It's just kind of a mess there. Generally speaking, I like there to be many, many backups. Okay? Because just because let's say I appoint my oldest daughter, you're our power of attorney, our trustee, right? things can happen in her life. She could be having her own medical event. Just say, I don't like my mom and dad anymore. I've heard that before. She may resign or not serve. It's nice to have a backup listed. So I say have as many backups as possible. I get very, very frustrated when I see documents provided by other attorneys and they get brought into my office and it just has husband and wife's name on it. The logical conclusion of that is one person will die first, so survivor has nobody listed. And maybe the survivor is too incapacitated to sign an updated one. So for goodness sakes, have as many backups as you possibly can. Now let me say this. I mentioned in the front of this that powers of attorney die with you. So people do this all the time. They go into a bank and say, "Hi, I am Stephen McClellan's daughter. He has died, and I'm here to use the power of attorney to collect the money." The bank will say, "Thank you for telling us that. We are actually going to close the account and not give you any information." Okay? So powers of attorney, when you say it that way, they're going to close down the account. I like there to be consistency in those powers of attorney. That is, if you say, "Hey, my oldest daughter I trust to be the power of attorney," I also trust them to handle things when I'm dead. So they can handle before I die and after I die. And that's actually one of the questions that I put on people's questionnaires. I have them fill that out. It's just a check to see if they get it. Because if they put a different name down in the client meeting, I'm saying, "Hey, a second, what are you doing here? What do you not trust about that scenario? You trust them while you're alive, but somebody else, and they're like, oh, I didn't realize that." So it's just kind of a way that we can kind of check, are they getting the concept of those things? Now, let me tell you, blended families, there's more blended families than ever. And this is so important. Very, very important. Blended families, more than any family, needs to have an estate plan. Got to make it very clear how things go. The challenge is this. A lot of times when mom and dad get sick at the same time, typically what I see is there's this uncoupling. I don't know a better word for it, but they kind of divide and their kids take care of them. So that's at least on the healthcare. So you might want to consider in a blended family situation that maybe spouse or your child takes care of you and spouse or another child takes care of somebody else. Or the other spouse. So really kind of a tough thing to consider. Who do I like? Let me ask this. Let me say this. Who's like my best powers of attorney and trustees? Who are the best ones that we work with, the people I like? So personally, I love engineers. And they are my favorite because they are so detail-oriented. They ask every single question. They're fantastic. When I work with them, I have to say, look, let's take things one at a time, okay? Because they can come up with any different possibility thing that could happen. So sometimes I say, look, here's the first 3 steps. Let's just stick with those and not get overwhelmed, okay? I love people who are detail-oriented and people who come into my office and they have questions written down. I love them. Most of the things I tell them, I'm going to cover on their questions, but they're ready. They're doing some research. I like, of course, I like family members who are nice and just easygoing. That's a good one to choose. You shouldn't choose the kid that is, a jerk or the one that people don't like. You got to choose someone that's likable. But your estate plan, let me say this, can really help your kids. Like if they don't agree, if you think the reason why not doing something is bad and the reason why wills are kind of bad, at least in my state, is that it prolongs things. And the longer you prolong things, the more sour things become. My state, for example, in probate has a 6-month creditor period. Other states is like 3 months. 6 months is half a year. That's a really long time to wait. Okay? So long story short, you want someone that, can stick with something for a year. So let them know, hey, this might take 6 months. I need somebody to handle that. I also think, let me say this. I like when you name somebody that has their own money and they have done well, that typically is a really good, trusted person. Because a lot of times they will say, well, yeah, I could give myself compensation for this role, but I'm not. Or, you know what, I'll give you more money than I'm going to give myself. And I just had a call today with a family member who was the appointed executor, and they knew that they were coming out on the short end of the stick by $5,000. And I just complimented them, and I said, I cannot tell you how refreshing it is that you've lived in such a life that $5,000 is not going to make it or break it. And you want someone who has some funds so they have some margin. Now, be careful. Some people who have money act like they get very greedy, and they want more and more money. And I often tell people in these contexts, it's probably not going to be 50-50. Hardly ever is 50-50. Somebody's getting the short end of the stick, whether it is things that aren't reimbursed or putting more effort and time into things. So if you can appoint somebody who has that discretion in life, that they'd be fine without the money. Like if one of your kids ever says, I don't care about getting anything, it's all yours, spend it however you want to, that is generally a good person to pick, because they're not sitting around and waiting for the inheritance. They're not waiting about how much they're going to get. But I'll say this, I have seen families break down over the wrong person being picked. Okay? Families fighting. I've seen families fight and siblings don't talk to each other over $1,000. $1,000, right? I had a client last week who said these words, and I don't think anyone's expressed it. I've had this thought, but I've never openly said it. But she said, look, if my kids fight over it for a minute, I'd rather burn it all to the ground or give it to a charity. I'd rather them be mad at me for that than them to have any. I don't want my money at all to cause any disagreement among my kids. So to her, and I felt the same way. If girls are going to fight over it, I'd rather go to somebody else, to a charity, to someone else. If you can't find someone within your family, sometimes you go outside your family. That's 100% okay. You can choose whoever you want to. It can be a family friend. Typically, you got to choose somebody younger. That's the key. If you choose somebody older than you, I look at you like, that doesn't make any sense. And you're like, oh, I didn't think about that. Yeah, I guess by the time I need help, they're going to be gone. In some cases, it makes sense to name a trust company. That's kind of the last thing I'll say. Trust companies are typically at banks. Be very, very careful. Here's what you need to know. I generally don't recommend trust companies. People who work at trust companies think they're the best thing and they're the solution to everything. That's not always true, okay? They are more expensive. They have minimums. You got to be careful because some trust companies, you may not even have enough money for them to even manage it. Okay, and so you really want to spell out specifically what you want, because sometimes trust companies can take on the mindset that, well, we're going to do what we think is best for your care, and you might have to spell it out in your trust or power of attorney. No, if I appoint you to manage my money, I want you to spend it on me lavishly on anything I need, because take care of me before it goes to the kids. All right? And caution. I think trust companies are worth it in the regard that they're going to do the work. If they screw it up, you can sue them and they have deep pockets. That's nice. But they're also going to drag their feet. They're going to slow things down and keep things managed going on and on forever. And be cautious, especially if you are going to a larger firm. Some of those larger firms like to appoint themselves as a trustee for these trusts that go on forever and ever and ever, okay? So if you have clarity and say, hey, disperse it all out quickly, a third, I think anybody can do that, especially in a trust. It's kind of open and shut. There's not a whole lot of work to do, so it doesn't really matter who you pick. And if you pick someone from out of state, great. A trust is simple, it's fast, it's quick. They will love it because they don't have to spend a lot of time in an attorney's office, in probate, all those kind of things. So your estate plan can also make it easier on them, and so whoever you choose, it doesn't really matter. It's just a few documents, okay? But I just want you to know that there are options available. Importantly, if you change your mind, change your documents. Don't stick with it. Sometimes those are my hardest conversations, when somebody has to admit on paper that we had our daughter, but she's just not turned out the way we want, and we want to name somebody else. There's no shame in getting it right then and there. You just don't want to keep it the same way it's always been, okay? So the Hearse Chaser, it just keeps on going and going. You got to keep making updates, making the best decisions, not just once with an attorney, but go back. And I think this is very helpful. If you can, every year, every 2 years, sit down with your attorney, pay for an hour of their time, just walk through the documents over and over again, talk to them about the family. Are they the right person? It's such a big decision that choosing the right executor can make all the difference. Even if you have the best documents, if you choose the wrong person, it's probably not going to be as smooth as it could be. Hope it's helped with this episode of the Hearse Chaser podcast show. Hope you have a great rest of your day.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Hearse Chaser podcast show. Please remember, you can't outrun a hearse, but you can leave your family with a smooth ride.